find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
What time is it? Let me check my watch. Oh, it's bone o'clock. In olden days, a glimpse of femur was only for morbid dreamers, but you're not alone. Bring anything bones. Two goofy gals with deathly interest go on a skeleton inquest in your headphones. Anything bones.
Hello and welcome to Anything Bones. I'm Sophie Iceberg Ahoy Schwartz.
And I'm Katelyn, sticky fingers on the car window heart.
Oh! And this is Anything Bones, the show where we talk about bones and bone-related topics.
That's right. And in case you hadn't picked up on the subtle hints that we've already thrown down, this episode is all about the Titanic.
Yes, this is a big one, so we are covering it together.
Yeah, we love teamwork here on this podcast, so we're double fisting.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate?
We're double fisting this story.
Yeah, it's just such a big topic, but it's one that I've always wanted to cover on this podcast because it's one of my original, what the fuck is this horrible event? I have to know more situations. I feel like I either learned about the Titanic or saw the movie in, middle school, and it just been hooked ever since.
Yeah, I think I saw it when I was in elementary school with my friend Alyssa, and we were just running around the family room where we were watching it with the cushions out on the floor, like they were pieces of the ship, and we were running from them to them. But then when the fucking movie ended and everyone fucking beefed it, we were so sad. We were sobbing the whole night because we were like, how could this happen? I don't understand how all these people could die.
Exactly. It's unfathomable and it's just so freaky. Okay. And even though it was over 100 years ago, it still is really fascinating. And I feel like we're learning new things about it all the time. The whole thing, only the ship, at the bottom of the ocean got discovered, I think in 85 or something. So relatively speaking, it's a newer discovery.
But I'm so excited to cover it because you will be covering kind of the ship, its journey, its unfortunate accident.
At the end of its journey.
Yes, the abrupt end
Goodbye.
of its journey. Yeah, goodbye. And then I will be picking up for the back half to talk about the death and destruction that was the result of the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah. So, without further ado, let's get into it, I guess. Unless you had any other business to attend to.
Nope, just gotta get a jewel pot. I gotta be medicated for this story.
Yeah, it did take its toll.
God, it just sucks so much.
It's devastating. There's a lot of bad shit going on in the world, but I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but here we go.
Yeah, what a fun, nothing distracts from war like seafaring tragedy.
Yes, yes. So, I looked at 3 different articles, one from Smithsonian Magazine, one from History.com, and one from Britannica.com. I'll go ahead and give James Cameron's Titanic movie some source credit there as well, because I definitely have seen it a few times. More what I like to do is stop watching when the ship starts to sink. That's when I turn it off. But
that's when I turn it on.
Yeah, so it's kind of appropriate that we're telling the story this way then. I'm starting out with a couple of quotes from dictionary.com. No, I'm just kidding. It's not.
Webster's Dictionary defines the Titanic as a big fucking ship.
Yes. So I'm going to start with some quotes because I was kind of trying to put my finger on it. What is so enduring and interesting about this story?
Mm-hmm.
So this is from an article from Smithsonian Magazine by Andrew Wilson. Quote, "A few weeks after the Titanic disaster, Thomas Hardy wrote The Convergence of the Twain, his famous poem about the conjunction between the sublime iceberg and the majestic liner. First published in Fortnightly Review in June 1912, it articulates the, quote, intimate wedding between a natural phenomenon and a symbol of the machine age.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fascinating point.
Yeah, it keeps going. It keeps going.
Okay.
And there's a lot of big words in this one. The marriage of the shape of ice and the smart ship is described as a consummation, a grotesque union that jars two hemispheres. 100 years after the sinking, we are still feeling the aftershocks of the wreck as the twin halves of this august event continue to fascinate and disturb us in equal measure.
Whoa.
Doesn't that just like, to me, that was like, oh yeah, that speaks to me.
Yeah, I really agree with that because it does point out something that I hadn't thought of like the Titanic being a symbol of like the industrial era and like this unsinkable ship, and this as a symbol of like how far humans have progressed up to this point.
Exactly.
Where this iceberg comes in, this jagged, hard, violent part of nature. Well, it's not even a violent part of nature. It's just chilling out. It's doing nothing. It's being an iceberg, and the violence of humanity coming into it and losing that battle is, I think, something that's humbling for humans.
Yes. History.com describes, quote, the ship's story has entered the public consciousness as a cautionary tale about the perils of human hubris.
Hell yeah. Nail, head, boom.
Yeah. So I thought I would start with that. Now we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of time. No, we're going to go back to the early 1900s, first half of the 20th century.
Leonardo DiCaprio was a scrappy little peasant out on the streets.
Boats were first realized on a Tuesday.
People first saw the ocean.
So the reason the Titanic was built, essentially, is because of competition among rival shipping lines.
Of course.
We're looking at the White Star Line, which was the owner of the Titanic, and they were in a battle with this other ship maker. It's Cunard, I think is the name. It's Cunard.
So the White Star Line was trying to kick them in the Cunards.
That's appropriate. Yeah. Cunards, I guess, had like two really big, like luxurious ships. And that was going on. They like released those into the world in 1907. And one of the ships set a speed record for the fastest average speed during a transatlantic crossing. And it was about 27.6 miles per hour, which doesn't sound that fast by our standards, but like, holy shit, we're moving.
But that's a steam-powered vehicle.
I know.
Huge. Big boy.
Fucking deal. And
big boy.
Nobody could get from America to England or vice versa until, these big-ass ships started carting them around.
No planes.
So the other ship that Cunard made was called the Lusitania, and I might be saying that wrong. And it was also launched in 1907. But fun fact, it did sink on May 7th, 1915, quote, when a torpedo fired by a German U-boat sunk the ship, killing nearly 1,200 of the 1,959 people on board, and precipitating the United States' entry into World War I.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't the Lusitania why we got our hands dirty in World War I?
Oh, hell yeah.
Like, that's so fascinating. Oh my god. I did, like, you were like, the Lusitania. I was like, I wonder if that's that same ship. Yep. And you were like, was sunk. And I was like, oh,
yep.
What?
So, and that was in 1915, so only like 3 years after this incident with the Titanic.
Yeah.
So, in 1907, chief executive of White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay, is like, fuck this. And he gets together with William J. Peary, who is the chairman of the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff. And they're like, we're going to make 3 fucking huge ships.
Okay.
Rather than the Cunard's fucking 2 ships.
2 really big ships.
We're going for 3. So they're going to make the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic.
Okay. All right. I sense a theme.
Yeah. So they have this idea, and then in 1909, in March, they start building the ships in Belfast, Ireland.
Nice.
And it takes them about, give or take, 2 years to construct the Titanic. This is crazy. So the Titanic was like impeccably decorated, but then it also had, quote, an immense first-class dining saloon, 4 elevators, and a swimming pool.
Oh, yeah, the Titanic had elevators.
Yeah, big fucking
That's
deal.
so wild.
Mhm.
That is wild.
And then it was also really exciting because the second class accommodations were like comparable to some first class accommodations, which also meant that the third class accommodations were a little bit better than normal. So everybody was pretty happy. I mean, particularly first class, but everybody was at least more comfortable than maybe they were on other ships, allegedly.
Well, I'm happy to hear that they were doing like what is kind of like vanity sizing for ship classes.
Yeah, they did focus a little too heavily on the looks and the fabulous amenities. With regard to safety...
Oh, safety? Why would that be important?
Okay. The Titanic had 16 compartments, like at the bottom of it, and there were doors on each of the compartments that could be closed with from above, like with a button or a switch or something, which was really cool. And that was so that water could be contained if it breached the hull. I'm going to use a lot of ship terms here, and just know that if I say it wrong, it's because I don't know what they mean, and I didn't bother to look it up.
Call Darren. He knows what ships. He knows what ships are called.
Yeah, we'll make it through. You get it. It's boat stuff.
Hashtag boat stuff.
Here's where the problem is with these compartments. They were watertight, most likely, but they weren't capped off at the top. So when the builders are like, so 4 of these compartments can fully flood and we'll still be like able to sail the ship to safety. But if water is coming over the top of these compartments and it's spilling into more than 4 compartments, which is eventually what happens and how the ship breaks apart, you've got some fucking problems there. Like, yeah, it's watertight, but you can get into each compartment from the other one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see how they would not have thought any more past the first, what was it, 4?
Yeah, so
you could shut off.
The reason the ship was said to be unsinkable was because of these 4 compartments that could take on water and still. There were 16 other compartments that would, sorry.
Don't worry.
There are 16 compartments. If 4 of them are full, we're totally fine. We're gonna make it. We're
so good.
Unsinkable here.
It's wild to imagine that more than 4 of these compartments could fill with water.
It will never happen.
Nope.
The other big problem, as most people know, was the number of lifeboats on the ship.
Ooh, classic.
So even if the lifeboats were at full capacity, it still only was enough room for about a third of the 3,300 people that the ship could fit. Yeah. So we can only save a third of you. Just to decide amongst yourselves.
That's wild. That's wild. They must have been really, truly confident in the fact that it could not be sunk. Because, or they were we'll get a third of them out and that's good.
Well,
what?
Also, there was no industry standard for having a lifeboat for every person on board. Things changed after this unsinkable ship went down.
Ugh, deep eye roll.
Yeah. So just keep that in mind. Full capacity of this ship was 3,300 people. It didn't get to that point in this maiden voyage, but that's how many people could fit on the ship. So it was fucking huge.
Yeah, jeepers creeps.
So we set sail on April 10th, 1912 from Southampton, England? Or do they have a fancy English way of pronouncing it?
No, I think Southampton is correct, unless they say Hampton weird.
I have no fucking idea. I should, though. I've been to England for a while.
Yeah, you lived there.
I lived there for 3 months and I don't remember anything. No, that's not true. I just don't remember how to pronounce this one word. Okay, anyway, so this ship was captained by Edward Smith, who was known as the millionaire's captain because all the wealthy people just wanted to rub shoulders with him.
He's a fancy captain.
He's a fancy captain. So there were a number of prominent people that took off on the ship on this day, April 10th, 1912. So I'm not going to go through each and every person that was on there, but there were American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim. Guggenheim might sound familiar to
Guggenheim?
You. It's a museum and other stuff.
And other stuff.
There was British journalist William Thomas Steed. Don't know him, I'm sorry. And then Macy's department store co-owner Isidore Strauss and his wife Ida. Those were just a handful of people who started.
But what you're saying is, the elite of the elite.
On the same night, they stop in France and they get on board John Jacob Astor and his second wife, Madeline. Astor is a very wealthy family. I want to say in America, I think in New York or something, but I didn't double check. I just know the name Astor.
It's very fancy, yeah.
And then Molly Brown, who is eventually going to be known as the unsinkable Molly Brown because she helps people stay calm when the lifeboats are going down, and she does live through it. And I'm pretty sure she's played by Kathy Bates in the Titanic movie.
Yes, Kathy Bates.
Don't quote me on that. So then we get to the morning of April 11th, and Titanic makes its last stop in Europe, in Ireland. And then at about 1:30 p.m., we set sail for New York City, which is the final destination. So on board are about 2,200 people. So a little less than the full capacity of the ship, but still a fuck ton of people. And then I guess about 1,300 of those were passengers. And then I guess about 900 were in the crew.
Wow.
So that's a big
a
fucking
lot.
deal.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
People with jobs now. That was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't even get very far, you guys.
Oh.
It sucks so much. Just before we get to April 14th, I just want to let you know that there were some wireless radio operators on the Titanic named Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, and they were the ones that were receiving the iceberg warnings, and they passed along all but one to the bridge, but their main job was relaying passengers' messages. So the iceberg stuff was kind of not necessarily their main focus, even though it maybe should have been.
Wait, what do you mean relaying the passengers' messages?
I don't know. That's just what it said. Was maybe people are getting, these are important people, so maybe they're getting telegrams, probably. Not text.
I mean, but the version of it,
yeah.
Hey, what's up? It's me. I'm thinking about you.
I think it was just an interesting tidbit to me because I was like, okay, so what were their jobs officially?
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't even know what their exact jobs were. But anyway, so we're at the evening of April 14th. We've only been at sea for a few days, but we're in an area that
I'm having a great time.
Yeah, we're having a great time. We've been to the swimming pool. We've been up and down all 4 elevators.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for riding all the elevators with me.
But we approach this area that is known to have icebergs. The captain does kind of alter the ship's course to try and avoid the icebergs by heading south, but he does not change the speed of the ship, which is going to be a problem.
Okay.
So at 9:40, another ship sends a warning of the ice field, and that's the message that was never relayed to the bridge. At 10:55, another ship called the Californian sent word over the radio. I know, you're like, oh, my state.
I know, I feel so bad about this one.
Yeah, this ship doesn't come out looking too good in the end.
No, it doesn't.
But they, at 10:55 on April 14th, they send word that they have stopped their ship, actually, because there's ice everywhere. So they're like, we're stopping.
Of course, they're Californians. They don't want to fuck with ice.
This is my favorite. Not really. This is terrible. Quote, Phillips, who was handling passenger messages, scolded the Californian for interrupting him.
Oh, Philip. Oh, Philip. Philip.
So the guys that are taking the news of the iceberg situation are overwhelmed or busy or don't really care, doing whatever. Then it's up to these two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, who are in the crow's nest. But it's, I guess, really hard to see icebergs when the ocean is calm. Something about how there wouldn't be very much water breaking at the base of the iceberg, so it'd be difficult to spot. But I'm kind of like, if you're already so close that you can see water breaking on the iceberg, like, isn't that the problem? I don't know. This was kind of unclear. But I guess they also didn't have binoculars up there.
How is your job lookout and you are on the most expensive, fancy boat that exists and you do not have binoculars or a fucking telescope? What is going on? What is even the purpose? Because I think we're going to figure out that if it's close enough to see, it's close enough to hit.
Yep. So that's exactly what happens. At 11:40 p.m., we are just south of Newfoundland, Canada, and an iceberg is sighted from the crow's nest, and the bridge is notified immediately.
Will you say it?
Iceberg ahead. Sorry.
Come on.
Sorry.
Come
okay.
on.
Okay.
Come on,
All right.
Katelyn.
Iceberg! Right ahead!
Thank you. Fucking thank you.
All right.
I feel like I'm there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. The ship is ordered to go hard a starboard. Sorry.
Hey.
Let me take that one more time.
I'm
Cut
keeping that in.
Starboard! Okay.
Well, I liked the part where they were going hard.
Yeah. Okay. So the ship needs to go hard a starboard, which turns the ship to the left and reverses the engines. So the Titanic is turning, but it is too close to this iceberg to not hit it. So it scrapes along the side of this iceberg, which ruptures 5 of the watertight compartments. So we've already got an issue.
No, but Katelyn, we're only supposed to need 4.
I know. And just to add insult to injury, because the engines were reversed, that caused the Titanic to turn slower than if it was just going at its normal speed. And a lot of people think that if the ship had hit the iceberg just like head on, it probably would have been okay, or at least a better outcome.
That's interesting.
I know, I didn't know that.
Slower. What, that it was going slower?
It was
that
turning
it,
so slowly that if they had just stayed going straight towards the iceberg, it probably would have been a better outcome than scraping against the side of it. They were trying to avoid the iceberg completely, but they couldn't.
Yeah.
So at this point, the captain orders them to start sending distress signals because we've got a problem. They did have to go down and inspect everything, and it took a little while to figure out what the fuck was going on. So it's 12:20 a.m. on April 15th, and that's when the distress signals start going out to ships in the area, including the Carpathia, the Olympic, which was also part of the White Star Line. Both of those were too far away to really do anything. The Californian may have been in the vicinity of the ship, but they had turned off their radio for the night.
Probably because Philip was rude to them.
Apparently, yeah. He was like, I don't want to listen to you. I'm trying to deal with Mr. Astor's order of ties or something. I don't have time to listen to your ice bullshit.
I do not have time for this.
I do not have time for this. I'm extremely busy up here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're sending out distress signals, but then it's time. The captain says we gotta get people in the lifeboats. Even though we only have 20 of them, just in case you forgot, there are 2,200 people on there, and at full capacity, these boats could carry 1,178 people.
Oh, Lord.
And guess what? We didn't have time to do the lifeboat training exercise on the ship. Even though the lifeboats were tested in Belfast when they were being put on the ship, the crew itself had no idea how much how much the boats could handle. So a lot of the first lifeboats out were way, way below capacity. I think the boats, I didn't write it down, but I think the boats could carry something like 70, 75 people. And one of the first ships launched only had 30 or less.
Oof, that sucks.
In the end, only 705 people are going to be rescued in lifeboats. So just listen, the lifeboats can hold over 1,100. 705 people are going to make it out alive on these lifeboats. Because we all know what's about to happen, so I'm just going to let you know right now.
Of course. I mean, if spoiler alert.
Yeah, if you don't know the story, I don't know what you're doing. Pause now and go watch Titanic.
Well, they'll get the story here.
Oh yeah, you're about to get it.
You're literally getting it now.
This is the point when the musicians on the Titanic are playing their music and trying to calm everybody down.
Did that really happen?
Yeah.
Did that really happen?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So we are at about 2 a.m. and the bow of the ship is continuing to sink because those watertight compartments are bringing the whole fucking thing down. And then the stern, which that's got to be the back, is coming out of the water. The propellers are visible above the waterline, so that's not supposed to happen.
No, that's when you know you've really beefed it.
So 2 a.m., there's only 3 lifeboats left, and the captain says to the crew, it's every man for himself at this point. And he's never seen again. He goes down with the ship. At 2:18 a.m., the lights go out, and then it breaks in two, and the bow of the ship goes underwater. The stern kind of floats there, bobs for a second. Not a second, it's like a couple of minutes. And then by 2:20 a.m., the whole thing is underneath the ocean.
Whoa.
So I'm going to pause here just to give you some firsthand accounts. Just one account of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Just one, because it's horrible and it sums it up perfectly. So this is the story, or this is the retelling of Dorothy Gibson, who was a 22-year-old silent film actor who was on the Titanic and on lifeboat number 7 along with her mother. So they had gotten on the lifeboat at about 12:45 a.m. She's wearing a coat and a sweater, and it's like below freezing out there. So everybody's not feeling it right now. The lifeboats don't immediately just dip from the ship. Sorry, I didn't mean to rhyme there. They are sort of waiting just a ways off from the ship to see if they can help. But when it becomes clear that the ship is going to go under the water, everybody's like, okay, the lifeboats just have to go. Otherwise, they're going to get sucked under by the boat.
Yeah.
So the people on the boat start rowing as fast as they can. And at this point, Dorothy is just watching the ship, just the stern, which is just kind of bobbing there. And then she says, quote, "Suddenly there was a wild coming together of voices from the ship, and we noticed an unusual commotion among the people about the railing. Then the awful thing happened, the thing that will remain in my memory until the day I die. Dorothy listened as 1,500 people cried out to be saved, a noise she described as a horrific mixture of yells, shrieks, and moans. This was counterpointed by a deeper sound emanating from under the water, the noise of explosions that she likened to the terrific power of Niagara Falls." And then she says, "No one can describe the frightful sounds."
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it was like to either watch this or to be on the deck and realize that the thing that you are on, the thing that was made to take you safely across this giant ocean, is going to suck you to the bottom of it.
So, yeah, about 1,500 people went into the water at this point, and that's where they all die of exposure or drowning.
Yeah, I heard Caitlin Doty was saying that the water was about 28 degrees and it would take about 15 minutes to die of hypothermia inside of it.
28 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius?
Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah.
Below freezing.
Yeah, that makes sense. As they're rowing away, Dorothy continues, "No one said a word. There was nothing to say and nothing we could do. Faced with the bitter cold and increasingly choppy seas, Dorothy had to acknowledge the possibility that she might not last the night." That was setting in now. They're like, it's cold.
Whoa.
What if nobody's coming for us? Because I'm sure there was no way for the captain to communicate that he had sent out distress signals.
Yeah, of course. So you have no idea.
As dawn is breaking on April 15th, the people in the lifeboat that Dorothy's in see a giant ship with smoke coming towards them, and they're like, hell yeah. So they are rowing as fast as their little paddles can take them towards what we find out is the Carpathia. And
hell yeah.
This is when, and this is just chilling to me, this is when Dorothy notices some cushions floating in the ocean that she recognizes as the green fabric from the ship and just like takes note of that. She also sees a bunch of icebergs at this point and is like,
Shit.
So they make it to the Carpathia at about 6 o'clock. She climbs a rope ladder. She's still in like her evening gown and her coat, and she is brought into a fellow passenger's room to have breakfast, and then she sleeps for 26 hours.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And at this point, you know, this is kind of where the Carpathia is the hero of the Titanic story. The Californian arrives at 8:30 a.m. and everybody's like, go fuck yourselves, apparently.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about the Carpathia is that when they got these distress signals, the captain of their ship was like, oh shit, it is on, and diverted all of their steam resources, which did the heating and some other functions on the ship, all to the engine. So he was like, all power to the engine, let's fucking go. And they ended up getting there in like under 4 hours, which is supposed to be like physically impossible for this ship to do.
They tried so hard.
They tried so hard, and they converted the dining rooms into like triage zones. They had a couple doctors on board, and they had people literally brewing coffee and getting breakfast ready for these people because they were like, they're going to need to eat. They strung lights all around the sides of the boat so that when they rolled up, they would be visible to survivors. So, like, they just did the most, and we love the Carpathia.
Yeah. But that's where my story ends and where Sophie's part begins.
Well, I think at this juncture, we are also going to have to take our coffee and breakfast for a little ad break.
Yes, and please, if you're feeling sad, pause and go outside. Or, you know, do something else and come back for more death and destruction.
Here we go.
Hey podcast lovers, my name is Haley and I run the Don't Identify podcast. I have been passionate about helping the unidentified get their names back ever since I found out I lived within miles of where Sherry Ann Jarvis, formerly known as the Walker County Jane Doe, was found. In my podcast, I tell the stories and provide information about unidentified people in hopes of reaching their loved ones and getting their names back. So come join me and help me advocate for these people. You never know, you could recognize someone's story.
Honk! Honk! We're back! That was a ship, in case you couldn't read my cues.
I am always reading your cues. And I got my cues and information. I'll say my sources right up top before I get into the second half of this tragedy that we're covering. I read articles from the New York Times, Mental Floss, TitanicFacts.net, Encyclopedia Titanica, Cult of the Weird, and The Week, as well as the video from Caitlin Doty. Halifax, which is the capital of Nova Scotia, was the closest major port to the site of the wreck of the Titanic. A Halifax ship, which is called a cable ship, the CS Mackie Bennett, was quickly outfitted as their morgue ship and was dispatched to where the Titanic had sank, which would be about 800 miles from where it was at. So it ended up taking almost about a week for them to get out there. The Mackie Bennett had all the embalming fluid that was available in Halifax to them. They brought aboard approximately 100 coffins, 100 tons of ice, and 12 tons of iron bars to weigh down bodies to be buried at sea.
Wow.
But this all would not be enough for what they would find at the wreckage site of the Titanic, unfortunately. This ship, the Mackie Bennett, was commanded by Captain Franklin Harold Lauder. On board were a priest and John R. Snow, who was the chief embalmer of John Snow and Company, which was the largest undertaking firm in Nova Scotia at the time and would be overseeing the handling of all of the deceased from the Titanic.
Sorry, real quick. I I wonder if the people at that company, did they know nothing? Jon Snow?
They did. Well, they were all real bastards.
I was trying to make a Game of Damn it. I was trying to make a Game of Thrones joke to lighten the mood. It didn't work.
I liked it. So the Mackie Bennett sailed off from Nova Scotia on April 17th, 1912, and upon reaching the site of the wreck, they immediately saw bodies floating in the water. It did not take them very long to figure out the large task at their hands. The Mackie Bennett, of course, was the first of approximately 4 ships that the White Star Line would contract to deal with the deceased of the Titanic. And the rate at which they paid the Mackie Bennett was $550 a day.
It's not enough.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Not enough. The Mackie Bennett ends up arriving at the site of the wreck on April 19th, and the next morning they start recovering bodies. Captain Harold Lauder saw that the surface of the water looked like it had flocks of seagulls on it, but they were the bodies in the white life jackets floating along, which I thought was just a chilling image. Yeah. How they recovered the bodies is that they would use little boats with about 5 or 6 crew members and room for 8 or 9 bodies. And they would basically just make trips back and forth from the open ocean to the Mackie Bennett. On the first day, they recovered about 51 people, and they were wearing life jackets, and they were visibly bruised from all of the wreckage that was falling around the ship, because there was just not just the threat of drowning or freezing, but all of the debris that was getting broken off of the ship as it sank. The rescue mission had to pause, at nightfall, and on the second day, they recovered 119 people. The captain also remarked that even though they were clustered together, no one was grabbed onto each other. They were all kind of in singles. No one was clutching each other, which was very interesting. I just thought that was kind of weird. So Jon Snow, who was the undertaker and in charge of transporting these bodies back to Halifax, he would, after they were pulled out of the water, he would give each a number to them, and their personal effects were put in a small bag and kept with their body. Snow ended up running out of embalming fluids and caskets pretty quickly, so he would wrap victims in canvas and place them on ice in kind of every available space on the ship.
God, that must have been so awful.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a crew member on this particular mission. Unfortunately, because there was limited space and so many dead to be recovered, they had to start burying people at sea. They didn't think that a lot of the bodies, because also they had limited ice. So you're dealing with limited resources, and there will be more ships coming later, but right now it's just the Mackie Bennett dealing with it all on their own. The undertaker just didn't think that these bodies would keep, and so they had to bury them at sea. And so this is where those iron bars came in, because they would wrap them in canvas and then attach them to the iron bar, and then they would have the minister who was on board do a service, and then they would bury them at sea.
Yeah. I mean, you're just doing what you can at that point.
Yeah, that's why this is really hard. I will also point out, though, in a couple of sources, it did say that a lot of the people who were buried at sea were identified to be third-class passengers and crew members. So there's a bit of an elitist tilt to some of this.
Yeah, and I also wonder if there was any, if somebody was identifiable, they would grab them, and if they weren't really identifiable, they might say, okay, this person should just be buried at sea, because they can't, no family member's going to be able to figure out who it is.
Exactly. That was the case for many people who were buried at sea, although they did bring back quite a few people who were unidentified.
Yeah, I bet. 1,500 people, what the fuck are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, like we said, this is a gargantuan task, way more than the Mackie Bennett can handle on its own. So the White Star Line ends up hiring a couple more ships to help them out. It ends up being 4 in total with the Mackie Bennett. On April 23rd, another ship, the Minna, arrives, and they have more embalming supplies, which is great, and more ice. And they help with the recovery of corpses. And after working with the Mackie Bennett for a couple of days, they're able to recover 306 of the Titanic victims. 111 were buried at sea by this point. Only 56 had been identified, and the remaining 190 are transported back to Halifax. So like I said, eventually it would take 4 full ships to retrieve all of the bodies. We have, of course, the Mackie Bennett, the Minna, the Montgomery, and the Algernon. The Minna found 17 sets of remains. The Montgomery received 4 bodies in May and buried one of them at sea. And the final victim was identified as Saloon Stewart James McGraffey, who was found by the Algernon at the end of May.
Fuck.
This happened in April. So the Mackie Bennett gets back to Halifax on April 30th, and when they arrive, there are church bells tolling, and there are a large number of hearses basically lined up at the docks to receive all of the dead. There was no morgue big enough to hold the approximately 334 people
In this tiny town in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, so they actually ended up holding all of the people, because not all 300 came back, but about 200 that they did bring back. They used a curling rink to keep them all preserved until they could be buried.
Yep, that's scrappy.
And very Canadian.
Yes, yes it is. I didn't know they had curling in 1912. I don't know anything
Curling is
about
old
the
as
sport
shit.
of curling.
I think curling is probably pretty old. Anytime I think that something's not that old, I go and look at it. Like fucking macrame. Remember when the Sultans were doing macrame? Future Sophie here. I just wanted to pop in with a fun fact about curling. One of the earliest pieces of curling equipment, a curling stone, was found in Scotland with the date 1511 inscribed on it, along with another inscribed with the date 1551. So, curling is pretty old. Anyway, so to break down the numbers for you a little bit, like I said, 334 bodies were recovered from the sea, which is only about 23% of the dead of the Titanic.
Fuck.
That's 23% of the people who died were recovered.
That's so crazy.
150 bodies that were buried in Halifax across 3 different cemeteries. 121 at Fairview Lawn Cemetery, 19 at Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery, and 10 at Baron de Hirsch Jewish Cemetery. And then 59 of those bodies were actually claimed for burial elsewhere. People came and got their loved ones and were like, we have a place for them. 42 of the bodies that are buried in Halifax still remain unidentified, and their gravestones just carry the date of the tragedy and nothing else.
Yeah.
And then 118 unidentified remains were buried at sea, and then 125 bodies were buried at sea due to their level of decomposition.
Yeah.
With all of that said and done, like we said, that's 334 people who were recovered out of roughly 1,500. So that means that there are 1,160 bodies that are completely lost.
Do we know what happened to them?
Well, a lot of people wonder if they are down at the bottom of the ocean with the ship.
Oh.
So a lot of people think that scholars will tell you that these bodies were swept away, which is definitely a possibility. There was a storm between the crash and the recovery, so there was a lot of opportunity for these bodies to be swept out to sea as far as 50 miles away from the crash site, as well as some of these lifeboats that weren't recovered. I think in the Caitlin Doty video, she said they found a lifeboat full of deceased people about 200 miles away from the crash.
Jesus.
Imagine being those. Oh. Anyway, But a lot of people argue that it is very possible that people were trapped inside of the ship, unable to get out, and they are still down there.
Yeah, I mean, they've probably been... This is terrible. I mean, they've probably been eaten by marine life. They probably were pretty quickly, right?
Well, we have to think about location.
Okay.
Because if you went down with the ship and you were on the deck, or you were maybe out in a hallway or in a large room, you would probably be eaten pretty quickly by the sea life and decompose with oxygen flow and currents going through these open parts of the wreck. But if you were, say, sealed in an engine room or a locked room or a cabin room, it could be possible that if you were sealed tightly enough in there, you could still be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Fuck.
In 1987, which was 2 years after the Titanic gets discovered, deep sea explorers are looking around and they're looking for corpses. Because what do we know about Titanic? A lot of people perished. And one expedition think that they found like a wedding band and possibly part of a human finger attached with it. But it could also just be a piece of debris near a piece of jewelry.
Right.
You know? In 2000, there was a lot of efforts to try to have this place like consecrated as a graveyard so that it couldn't really be fucked with. Because, you know, if there are dead bodies down there, it is a burial ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Objectively.
Straight up. But one of the papers that was published on it said that there was, quote, many of were trapped in this ship's hull, but it didn't cite any specific scientific evidence, if you know what I mean. So it did end up becoming a protected site, which is good. But there's still kind of the open question as to whether or not there are human remains down there. Our friend James Cameron, yes, that fucking James Cameron.
Director and boat guy, apparently.
And boat guy. So he's been down there to the Titanic over 30 times, which is more than anyone else.
He fucking loves it down there, apparently.
He loves it down there. I mean, can't blame him. Fucking fascinating.
Yeah.
I have watched a lot of, like, Titanic's extra footage where they're like, this is how we went down in this little, like, submarine, and we're looking around the ship, and this is a pearl necklace on the ground of the ocean.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm loving it.
Well, I feel like they've brought a lot of artifacts to the surface now, haven't they?
They have.
Yeah.
They have, yeah. But James Cameron will tell you that he has never seen any evidence of human remains down there.
Well, he's not gone deep enough.
No, I mean, but he'll get pretty upset when you ask him, apparently.
Okay. Touchy subject, all right.
Very, very touchy subject. But he still definitely was in favor of the site's preservation.
That's
He
appropriate.
loves the Titanic, and he doesn't want it fucked with.
So then he wants the ship to stay on the bottom of the ocean rather than the other people who want it to be, like, brought to the surface again, right? Aren't there people that wish it weren't at the bottom of the ocean? Or am I making that up?
I'm pretty sure that there are people who are not. I did not look into that.
No, I didn't either, obviously, but
I guess that makes sense. I'm on team leave it at the bottom of the ocean because that's where it ended up, and that's where I believe a lot of those people still are. I believe that it is impossible that everyone got out of that ship or drifted away from it. And I will show you this picture that came out that is kind of a compelling argument. There is this photo that was released of this leather boot and coat that appear to be like buried in the mud. And the way that they are laid out definitely looks like it was a leg. I will show you this. I will send you this picture.
Oh, yeah. It looks like somebody got buried in the mud and their boot is sticking out is what it kind of looks like.
Yeah, it's extremely compelling. But to kind of wrap this up, James DeGaldo, who is the director of Marine Heritage at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is on the side of the fact that there are probably human remains down there. There's a quote from him about this photo. He says, quote, "This is clearly where someone came to rest on the bottom. The photo speaks powerfully to this being a gravesite."
Yeah, that I agree.
Yeah. So in conclusion, the hard thing about the dead of the Titanic is that many of them were put to rest in Halifax, some even separated into religiously appropriate cemeteries, some even claimed by their families. But there were so many that were buried at sea who were unable to be identified, and so many times more souls we don't even know where they ended up. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing about the Titanic to me, is all this, is how lost these people truly were.
Yeah.
You know, lost to time completely.
Yeah, just erased like they never were. But we know that's not true.
We know that's not true. Well, we remember them even if we don't know them individually. We remember them together. And we think about people like the crew of the Carpathia, who pushed their ship as hard as it could possibly go to save the 700 that would survive.
Yeah, and if they hadn't gone that fast, the death toll would probably have been even higher.
Much higher.
So, yeah. What a crazy time. What a crazy story. It's just, it chills me to the bone. No pun intended. Every time I hear about it.
Same. And it just, I guess, you brought up doing the Titanic like a week or two ago, and we decided to cover it together. And then within that time, the world has gotten a bit stirred up, and it's interesting to think about mass death events when mass death events are happening concurrently.
Yeah.
Just urge everybody to be more like the Carpathia and less like the Californian.
Yes, and just appreciate your bones. And I'm thinking about all the people in Ukraine that just had to be separated from their family members or are just suddenly now having to fight for their country's freedom just because there's suddenly a war going on. It's a really scary time. I don't know if this episode was a reprieve from that necessarily, but
I know, a bit of a downer, but I mean, if you can picture yourself for a moment dancing on the beautiful glitzy dance floor of the Titanic and all its amazing finery, and pause it before and stop watching before the ship crashes.
Yeah. I'm thinking about being on the bow of the ship with my arms outstretched, saying, "I'm flying. Hold me, Jack. I'm flying." What does she say?
I'm the king of the... No, it's him that goes, "I'm the king of the world."
But there's a part where Kate Winslet has her arms outstretched and Leo DiCaprio is behind her, holding her waist, and she's quote-unquote flying.
1 second.
Hold on. Keep your eyes closed. You trust me?
I trust you.
All right. Open your eyes.
I'm flying. Jack.
It's very simple. Just, "I'm flying, Jack." Okay. I don't know why. I don't know why I thought that she said, "Hold me, Jack," as well.
Honestly, really, I don't want to fall. Something tells me this water is very cold. No, stop playing the Titanic.
we don't have the money to pay for that.
No, I'm gonna have to cut that down a little bit too. Yeah, but I enjoyed being back in the virtual studio with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Talking.
Thanks for coming to our Titanic talk. I wanted to do it together because I started thinking about covering the The Titanic.
I knew it. What are we covering?
The Titanic. I I keep saying it wrong. But no, I like even thinking about covering the Titanic, I was like, I can't do this by myself. There's no reason to. So
No, and I've been obsessed with this what happened to dead people on the Titanic for a long time.
oh yeah. Well, thanks everybody. We hope you learned something new about this incredibly tragic and well-known story. And appreciate your bones.
Yeah, appreciate your bones. And
Voyage. Farewell.
Thanks for listening to Anything Bones. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Anything Bones Podcast, or email us at anythingbonespodcast@gmail.com.
thank you to Nick Kruger for our spooky music and Stephen Vetteroff
At Chubby Scrubby on Twitter,
for our jazzy vocals, and thank you to Camilla Franklin
at Camilla Strader on Instagram.
for our beautiful bony artwork. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Near